Okay, so good morning. Today we are talking about managing product, services, and brands. And one of the things that is a little interesting here is that we haven't talked about services, and we'll talk about services marketing after this. So it's another example of how this is all sort of integrated. We talk about these topics as though they are silos, but in marketing, because it is the only fully integrated function of the firm, you have to think about this in terms of how all of the pieces sort of fit together. So marketing really is the liberal arts of the business college, and you have to sort of bring all of these sort of different topics together and understand how they work holistically within the firm. So we will talk about services on Thursday, but we're going to talk about, mostly this is about managing brands. And of course, services are a big portion of our economy now, and so it focuses on that. So we haven't talked about services yet, but mostly this chapter focuses on branding, and what I want you to take away from this is mostly focused on sort of branding and a recognition that although we haven't talked about the unique aspects of services yet, that services are an important part of the economy, and of course that's leading to big issues with brands. Some of the biggest name brands right now in the marketplace in a post-industrial economy are service brands, right? They produce nothing really tangible. Like Google, for example, is primarily a service brand. Now they do have, like, I guess, they still make a Google phone, like a Google Pixel. Do they still make that? Yes? You said no, or you have no idea? I thought you were shaking your head no.
I think they just released the Pixel 5.
Did they? Okay, so they make one tangible product at least. But primarily the value of Google is not in that tangible product, it's really in the service that they provide. And that brand name is obviously one that's worth billions of dollars in a post-industrial world. So products have, and when we talk about products, we're talking about services like Google as well. We lump them all into that category. They have life cycles just like people have life cycles. So marketing, because it is a relatively new academic discipline, it borrows heavily from other academic disciplines. So we borrow heavily from the biological sciences, in that there's this idea of everything has sort of a life cycle, right? I mean, animals have a life cycle, people have a life cycle, products also have life cycles. So it depends on what stage of the life cycle you're in, what you're going to do, and how you're going to develop that brand. So in the introductory stage, you release the product, it grows slowly, the profits are minimal, you're going to have to probably heavily advertise. If you're the first person to do this, and I have some experience with this, I told you all that my family owns this company in Guthrie, Oklahoma. We own a number of bed and breakfasts. At one point in time, we owned 5 bed and breakfasts. We've sold some of them off. My mother's sort of a serial entrepreneur. She develops things and then sells them and looks for other opportunities. So at one time we had 5 bed and breakfasts in Guthrie. We've sold some of them. We're down to 3 currently. And when we started, we were the first bed and breakfast in Oklahoma. And people didn't know what bed and breakfast was in Oklahoma. We come from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and bed and breakfasts are very popular in Santa Fe and Colorado, and they're very popular back east. Nobody knew what they were in Oklahoma, and so we had to introduce people. And it was not a remarkable success to begin with. You'd think, oh, you're the first one. You're on the ground floor. It was tough. People in Oklahoma were used to, staying at I remember probably the most popular hotel in Oklahoma City at the time was down on Meridian Avenue, just north of the airport. It was a Holodome. That was a big thing back then. They made these hotels, Holiday Inns did, where they had miniature golf and indoor swimming pools and stuff like that. It's torn down. It was kind of a neat place. We used to stay there when we were coming through Oklahoma before we bought the property that we have. So you're having to generate demand. And how do you do that? By making people aware of your brand and your product and advertising heavily. your profits are minimal. So you're trying to get this primary demand for your product. Then in the growth, you see rapid increases in sales. So about 5 years after we started this bed and breakfast, people started to realize when we started doing these murder mysteries, and other bed and breakfasts started popping up in Guthrie. It's a historic town. We're the first state capital, and other people, start saying, hey, well, I'd like to do that. I'd like to, and other businesses try. We have people even try to do the murder mysteries, try to do murder mystery parties. One of the other big competitors that we had that's gone out of business tried to do that. They didn't realize how much work it was to sort of write them and facilitate them and conduct them. So then your sales start to increase, competition appears, and your profits begin to peak, usually at that point in time. In the mature stage, you start to see a slowing of sales. The marginal competitors will leave the market. So Guthrie, because we had the first bed and breakfast, and at one point in time we had the most number of bed and breakfasts of any city in Oklahoma, we started branding. We teamed together and we started doing some group branding, and we decided we were going to, as a group, call ourselves the Bed and Breakfast. The Guthrie Bed and Breakfast Association was going to call ourselves the Bed and Breakfast Capital of Oklahoma. At some point, tastes change, and Bricktown popped up. And I was on city council. I was vice mayor at the time, and they did this huge canal, right? We've got a canal that's longer and larger than the canal in San Antonio, which is probably the most sort of famous, canal area in the United States. So they started developing that. People started, not necessarily wanting to go to Guthrie and stay in historic properties. They wanted to go down to Bricktown. Now, Bricktown is really struggling because your generation, my generation, thought like Bricktown was really cool and we wanted to do that. Your generation, what do you all want to do? Where do you all hang out? Did I find my ducks? I guess I forgot my ducks.
I like Midtown area.
Yeah, that's your generation seems to. I mean, that's what the research sort of suggests is that Plaza and Midtown. Don't forget, Paseo. Yeah, that's sort of where the hipsters of your generation are hanging out. I cannot believe I forgot my guts. So, it's changing. Teresa says they're making a Google Pixel 6, so we're now on the sixth generation of Google Pixel. So these tastes change. One of the things that's happened since COVID is we've seen a resurgence. We haven't advertised in like 2 years. And we're seeing a resurgence of people that are interested in, because we're one of the few entertainment venues that's open. Because we're a small, entertainment venue. It's not like going to the movie theater. And so we are one of the few that's actually still open. And so we've seen this resurgence. But, in the 2000s, I'm going to give you a marker since I forgot to bring the docs. Give me the marker back that I'll remember. Give you your points. Don't lose the marker. I swear I brought those. I guess I'm losing my mind. I'm having more and more senior moments. So we're seeing a little resurgence and interest in Guthrie and places like that, places that you can go and you can walk and you can do stuff that's sort of outside, not necessarily in a big crowded place. So a lot of the competitors left the market. There are probably now in Guthrie, maybe, I think, 3 other bed and breakfasts besides ours in the city. Now, some of it has changed. Something called Airbnb popped up. And so some of those, you don't know because they're people's homes and they don't really like advertise except on Airbnb. And so the bed and breakfast market itself has sort of shifted in terms of what they are. So I have a friend who does Airbnb in Oklahoma City, and he never meets his guests. He gives them the code to the door. He changes the code every week and he gives them a code. He has somebody that goes in and cleans for him. He does it all through the web. That's not historically what bed and breakfast was. Historically, bed and breakfast was about people who wanted a more unique experience than just going into a hotel room, locking your door, and leaving sort of in the morning, right? So profits start to decline due to price competition. In the declining stage, sales drop. Companies may delete or harvest products. A product that you can think of that's, people still put this on their business card. I'm still fascinated. If you look at my business card from UCO, it has a fax number. I have no idea where that fax even is. I mean, they put this fax number on there. I have no clue where that fax machine is. Does anybody send faxes? I guess the medical community still does send faxes. I have no idea why. I mean, we've got this wonderful technology. It's called email. It has, led to basically a death of faxes. You used to go to Sam's, and that was, a big product that they would sell. Copy machines used to be big. Now, more and more, we're trying to do less and less with paper. There is some evidence to suggest that you don't learn as well if you take notes on an electronic device as you do if you take notes by writing it down. There's something about, first of all, and I can tell you from my own experience, when I was in law school, that's when I started taking notes on a laptop computer. And I noticed that because I can type, I learned to type in high school, and I can type accurately about 130 words a minute. So I'm really pretty fast at this. And I don't have to think about it, right? I mean, if somebody's talking, I can type as fast as they talk for the most part. And so in law school, I started to notice that I wasn't performing necessarily as well as I had in my undergraduate and graduate career. And it was because I wasn't really thinking in class. I was just sort of going off and just, typing stuff down. Whereas if you actually write things down, what you're having to do is you're having to think about what's being said, because you can't write as fast as somebody can talk. So you're having to sort of internalize it and put it down in a shorthand form that makes you think about the material that you're learning and digesting. So maybe some of those things from paper will come back. One of the things that's happened is they noticed, and there have been some studies that suggest, for example, that your reading retention is far less on this device. So those of you who read, I know I read on my Nook now, but if I really want to retain something, I have to actually have a physical book, because there's something about it. It involves a lot of the senses. Books smell funny, right? They smell different. Paper, particularly new paper, smells different, and they think that all of those things influence the way we learn. So maybe there will be a resurgence of some of these things. Not sure that the fax machine is going to come back, though. I think that one's pretty well gone. So the length of the product life cycle, there's no set time. Some products, so if we look at various products that I will talk about, let's think about an iconic brand like Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola enters the market. This is kind of a long product life cycle. This would be introduction here, growth, maturity, decline. Where do you think Coca-Cola is in the product life cycle? You think it's in maturity?
Or like towards the end.
You think it's like maybe right here?
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
I can't base it off of personal, but I drink less soda now. And a lot of my friends are drinking less and less soda now.
I think that's right. I think that in the United States, Coca-Cola is in a decline because people recognize that this is just not healthy. I mean, it's just not great. I was addicted to Diet Coke, and I would probably consume 12 or 13 Diet Cokes in a day. There's now some evidence to suggest that one of the reasons people are still gaining weight, even though they've switched from fully leaded Coca-Cola products to Diet Coke, is that your body, when it tastes something sweet, it's still still has the same impact on your blood glucose level as it does if you're actually you're saving the calories, but your body thinks, oh my goodness, I'm tasting something sweet, that's sugar, I've got to start storing calories. And so it starts storing calories, and where it stores calories from things like sugar and blood glucose is generally in your midsection. And so there's some evidence to suggest that maybe like even diet drinks are not very good for you, because although you're not getting the calories, your body's still going, ooh, sugar, and wanting to do that thing where it converts calories into stored energy, and it converts it and puts it around your midsection. So about, I guess, 2.5 or 3 years ago, I just quit drinking Diet Coke, and I quit cold turkey, and I'm drinking water. One of the things that I've noticed since I've done that is that in 2 times in my life, my taste buds have really improved. One was, I was a very committed smoker for a long period of time, and I just gave up smoking, cold turkey, quit. And about 6 months after I gave up smoking, we were out to dinner at Outback. I hadn't eaten, and I was like, I'm not sure I like this. I was like, this is really spicy. And my taste buds just improved dramatically. The second was about a year after I gave up Diet Coke, I started to notice that things like taste really, really different. You can taste. I mean, what can you use Coca-Cola and Diet Coke for besides drinking it?
I've seen like weird cleaning videos like on YouTube, but I don't know if they work or not.
Like cleaning your battery cables on your car, right? I mean,
it's oil out of shirts.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's got this high acidic level. I mean, if it's gonna clean battery cables on your car, think about what it's doing to your taste buds and your insides, all of that acid. And so, yeah, I think, so Coca-Cola is having to, in places like the United States, where I think it's clearly in decline, people are there, what is Coca-Cola's bottled water product? I never thought we would pay more for water than we do for gas, but we do. So Coca-Cola's had to come up with other product lines, right? People are not drinking Coca-Cola like they used to. They're drinking bottled water. They're drinking, these other things that are at least perceived as being more healthy. I'm not sure how much more healthy they are. Now, in other parts of the world, Coca-Cola is not in a decline. Right? They've still got a lot of room in the developing world to grow, but I think they're either in the maturity or sort of in the decline stage, because people recognize that it's just probably not that great for you. But it's taken a long time for that to happen. Coca-Cola is a product that's over 100 years old, and it's taken a long time. Some things, when I was in college, one of the things that entered the market and became a fad very quickly and had a product life cycle that went sort of like that, just skyrocketed up and then down, were these stupid little stuffed animal things called Beanie Babies. And I don't know why people were so addicted to them. They're not all that cute. They're not all that cuddly. I mean, they're not like most plush stuffed toys, but people became obsessed with them. I even bought one when Princess Diana died. I have a couple of princesses, because I thought anything that has association with Princess Diana will probably be worth a lot of money. But these Beanie Babies were literally like, people were trading them and selling them for hundreds of dollars. And they became sort of like, baseball cards go through this. When I was a kid, baseball cards became very popular again. They sort of died out and they came back and people were trading baseball cards. But it was like, it was like a year. People are like trading Beanie Babies for hundreds of dollars, and then boom, they're gone in the market. I've seen lots of these sorts of fads happen. So since I come from an agricultural family, my family produces beef cattle. One of the things that a lot of the ranchers around my father and people here in Oklahoma were doing is all of a sudden ostriches they're like, ostrich is going to become the next big thing. Everybody's wearing ostrich boots, and we're going to have ostrich meat. And and they were selling eggs, ostrich eggs, for like thousands of dollars. Not like ostriches, but the eggs, All of those people have gone broke. And that was one of those things that entered the market and, became very popular and sort of entered and left. So we can have this sort of long, you can have a short, or you can have sort of a moderate, middle of the road kind of product life cycle where it lasts more than a year or two, but it's not necessarily going to last, as long as Coca-Cola has lasted, which has been over 100 years. So what determines the length of the product life cycle? And what determines the shape of that product life cycle? High learning products. When computers first came out, I remember my mother's first computer. She was the first real estate company in northern New Mexico to have a computer. It was an IBM. We still have remnants of those days. So let's look at from the IBM. Okay, so what it ran off of were these huge, big floppies. And they were called floppy disks because they were, in fact, floppy. They were about this big. They were square. You put them in. You closed the little door manually. It didn't come out. You didn't push a button and it go in and out. You closed the little door manually, and then it would run. And they were very, very fragile. I mean, if you put anything magnetic next to them or electronic, it corrupted the data. So people would back up like these disks. You'd have all of this data and you'd save it on more than one disk in an attempt to keep it from getting corrupted. And I remember the first time when I was in high school, we had this computer left over from and we'd gotten another one by then, but I remember not saving a report and losing it, and just being devastated by that. And so we still have remnants of that. If you look at, for example, let's open an Excel file. Up here, this little icon, I've got to switch screens. This little icon that you used to save, can't really see it, it's a disk. That's a harkening or a reference back to when we actually had these floppy disks that you used to save stuff. Nobody actually saves stuff on floppy disks anymore. Then the disks got smaller. They were like 3 by 5, and they were plastic. They were harder. The case was harder so that they wouldn't be damaged as easily, but they could still get damaged. But that's sort of a remnant of those times when we have these floppy disks. But slide. It took a long time for people to really get used to computers and to embrace them, and they've been around for a long time, right? The life cycle for computers has been really, really long, and it's had several resurgences. So when laptops started becoming more and more affordable, everybody started having a laptop. Well, what has led to a reemergence in the life cycle of desktop computing? Gaming, yeah. Gaming has led to this reemergence. So Tessa said that, yeah, it's nearing decline. More brands of flavored sparkling water are coming out and being marketed. You said gaming, is that right? Gaming is absolutely led to, because you have to have, the big screens. And so if you're going to have the big screens, you might as well have the big CPU and all of that. And isn't that just sort of wonderful? So we've seen this sort of decline in desktop computing, and then all of a sudden these single shooter games and these online gaming things that my nephew plays, and I'm never keeping up. So he, at one point, for like 30 seconds was really into Fortnite, and he and his friends were playing Fortnite. And so I played Fortnite. I actually made it to be the second person. I was like number 2 in the game. And I did it just by being a complete and utter coward and just, like hiding and staying right near the cloud. And so a week later, I go back to Dallas and I'm like, well, Carson, do you want to play Fortnite? Uncle Grant, Fortnite was so yesterday, right? I mean, he's on to some other game, but it's led to sort of this reemergence of desktop computing, because you want like all those screens which you can see the really intense graphics and things like that. So high learning products like computers, those tend to stay around. Low learning products come in and go out. Think about consumer packaged goods. We all know what cereal is. We all have had probably cereal as a child at some point in time. And you know, when Disney comes out with a new movie, they'll release frozen cereal, right? I don't know if you can still get frozen cereal, but it's basically some kind of version of Lucky Charms. It's just with the frozen princesses. But when that sort of, you know, ends in popularity, they'll release something else. That doesn't take a lot of learning. It'll come in, it'll go out fairly quickly. Talking about variations in class and form and how that affects the product life cycle. So cereal, again, is something that's sort of a staple of breakfast in the American household for many of us. We grew up with that. But you know, the sort of form it takes, this class of products is going to stay around. The form it takes, you know, we'll have Frozen. What's Disney's latest movie that's come out? You know?
I think I saw Raya. That's because my niece.
I like, you know, it used to be, again, movies, they're released to theaters and people have this buildup, but now they're streaming. I think Disney's releasing all of it. So I'm not sure. What did you say it was?
Raya?
I saw that too. Like I saw an ad for it, but I think it's like on Disney Plus. But I don't know if that's all there.
Okay. I'm sure that if it becomes really popular, all of a sudden we're going to have, you know, whatever that is, cereal pop up, and it will last about a year, and then probably, you know, a year or two, and then it'll be gone. I'm kind of surprised at how long Frozen has lasted, but it's because they released a second, you know, Frozen 2.
And on Disney Plus, they have like new series.
Yeah. They did the same thing, How to Train Your Dragon. I think they released a How to Train Your, I think I remember this, a How to Train Your Dragon serial, and now they've got the little 30-minute, you know, things, and that sort of extended the product life cycle because it extends the franchise. The Harry Potter franchise, obviously, you know, that was a huge multi-year thing, and that really extended the life cycle of that franchise. And now they've come out with sort of a second version of it, which is Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, but I don't think that's caught on quite as much as the original sort of Harry Potter has caught on. So the life cycle of consumers is going to be dependent on sales and the ability to generate revenue, and that's going to determine people's tastes change, right? People are fickle and they'll change. So how do you keep the cycle going longer? What can you do? Well, branding. So brand scholars, and I'm going to tell you that every academic is enormously solipsistic. So what does this mean? What is solipsism? Solipsism is the philosophical justification for narcissistic personality disorder. So narcissistic personality is a psychological diagnosis that we make. A lot of psychiatrists and psychologists, when Donald Trump was president, said he suffers from extreme narcissistic personality disorder. I will tell you, having been a politician myself, having been vice mayor in Guthrie, having run campaigns not only for myself but for other people, all politicians are somewhat narcissistic. I mean, it's just, in order to take that risk, I mean, you have to have somewhat of an ego to put your name out there, put it on the ballot. You have to probably have a little bit of narcissistic personality disorder. Solipsism says the self is all one can know, right? That's all I can know is I can never truly empathize with anybody else because all I ever know is myself. And so when you get a PhD and you devote this level of study and intensity to something, you believe that you can explain away the world, right? So I wasn't a marketing professor to begin with. I was a political science professor and then a professor of legal studies. And then I became a marketer. And, I used to think like political science explained the world. It was always fascinating to me that students would say things in my American National Government class, like, I just don't like government, it's boring. And the only reason I took your class is because you weren't Dr. Jones. We actually had a Dr. Jones. I thought he was very funny, but he had a very dry sense of humor, and students would be like, I just didn't like Dr. Jones. So at the time I was 22, I sort of got that. I could relate more to students, I guess, at that point in time than someone who was approaching 60 could. And so, I think politics is fascinating. There isn't anything that politics doesn't touch. Everything from the qualifications to the person who writes the prescription for your eyeglasses to how deep and in what you must be buried is determined by politics, by government. You can't just throw grandma out in the backyard when she dies. And it's gotten more complex. You have to be buried in a casket. You can't just throw a sheet over you and like that. And now the requirements are, because the funeral directors associations have gotten good at lobbying, you can no longer just be buried in a casket in most places. You have to be buried in a concrete vault. So they put you in the casket, they put the casket in the vault, which is why more and more people are opting to go with affordable cremations for grandma. And nobody really wants to go to cemeteries anymore. That's one of those things that it's on the way out. So, like I thought government could explain everything. Government explains how you get your eyeglasses. It provides roads. Everything is touched by government. When I became a legal studies professor, the law is everything. There isn't anything that the law doesn't touch. Our relationship to each other in this classroom is governed by the law. So in my student evaluations several years ago, some student wrote, "You're not very funny." Well, yes, I am. Like I'm hysterical, right? And if you fall asleep in my class, I'm morally offended by that because I am funny. And I think, I have a concealed carry permit. I think I ought to just be able to take out my pistola, my .357, and spike you. Justice would be fast, swift. And I would guarantee that it would only take one of you falling asleep in my class, and that would never happen again. But I can't do that because the law says I can't do that, right? We don't impose the death penalty for falling asleep in somebody's class. So when I became a marketer, of course, I think marketing makes the world go round. Well, you get into a specialty and you think that specialty, even within the subset of that discipline, explains the world. So Kevin Lane Keller and brand scholars like him, who are marketers, but their primary focus of their research is in branding, say branding is the most important decision a company will make. And I don't think that's true, and I'm going to tell you why. I've seen lots of companies, Chesapeake, for example. I knew years ago, that's a Ponzi scheme, right? Load yourself up on debt. Don't ever really produce anything. They sort of produce stuff. They had more leases than they actually were producing natural gas. But yeah, it's on the verge of bankruptcy and I think it's gone bankrupt. They filed for bankruptcy. And I can't wait until they completely collapse, because I think their campus down on Western Avenue is going to make wonderful condominiums, and I want to buy one. I think it's just a great part of town to live in. And when it's gone, I hope they condo it, so that I can buy a condo and live down in that area, because I think it's a cool place to live. Chesapeake is great branding. They had a great trademark, which is part of the brand. They had a great name. They built this whole thing, and it's a great brand. They had a crappy product and they failed. But Keller argues that it's the most important decision a company will make. I will tell you as a lawyer who took lots of companies through bankruptcy at one point in time, I saw lots of people who had good designs, had a nice trademark, and ultimately failed because their product was horrible. But brand scholars will argue that it's the most important decision a company will make is branding. And it certainly is an important decision. I don't think it's the most important. So how do we develop and manage a brand? Well, it's been a major topic of research and marketing since sort of the early marketing studies. Most of the research in this field is focused on tangible goods and large corporations. So one of the things that we have to think about is how we transfer that from products in a post-industrial society into focusing on services. How do we translate that from focusing on sort of tangible goods and marketing those goods like Coca-Cola and apply those brand principles to services which are intangibles? And there are some differences there in the way you need to brand. So what is a brand? A brand is a name, term, sign, symbol, or design that identifies the goods of a seller. Branding provides a mental image in the minds of the consumer. When I say the names of certain brands, certain things should come to mind, right? If I say McDonald's, you get a mental image in your mind. What are some of the mental images that you get in your mind when I say McDonald's?
Golden arches.
What?
The golden arches.
The golden arches, yeah, the iconic M of McDonald's is something that comes to mind. What else comes to mind? What? The Ronald McDonald. They've actually gotten away. Clowns are creepy. They figured this out, but for years, yes, people like that was their sort of mascot was Ronald McDonald. They tried to sort of update him and make him hipper and cooler. Didn't work because clowns are creepy, and they figured this out. But they had this whole series of cartoons that went along with Ronald. There was the Hamburglar. There was what else? I'm trying to think who else was part of that cast. But there were all these little things that went along with that. Fries, like I think the best French fries. McDonald's has ultimate line, like they're like crack. Now only when they're fresh. If they're not fresh, they're just kind of fries. But when they're fresh, I think McDonald's has a fantastic fries. What most people think of, in addition to the Ronald McDonald, the golden arches, is cheap, fast, consistent. That's what's made them popular. Cheap, fast, consistent, right? Doesn't take long. They're pretty cheap. Even you can still to this day, although I think fast food has become overwhelmingly sort of priced itself out. You can still, there's still a dollar menu or a value menu at McDonald's, and you can still get stuff on that menu, for $1. Most McDonald's do the 2 for $2, and for breakfast in the morning, you can get sausage McMuffins without the egg for 2 for $2. So you can still get stuff fairly cheaply at McDonald's. It's consistent from McDonald's to McDonald's, and it's fairly fast, right? So it provides this mental connection in the mind of the consumer. A brand distinguishes the products or services from other providers. So when you hear McDonald's, you know that it's different from Burger King. What makes Burger King unique? What's their sort of brand and their position in the market? They sell hamburgers, right? They're selling hamburgers. What'd you say?
Oh, the Crown. That's what
The Crown. Okay. What else makes Burger King different or unique? I mean, not all hamburgers are the same, are they?
They have a strange variety of food.
They have a strange variety of food. What do you mean by that?
Tacos. There was like some weird borderline like Panda Express thing that they carry. I don't know.
They have like chicken fries, and those just seem weird.
Okay, chicken fries. You said they have like a stranger menu. I think for me, one of the things that distinguishes Burger King from McDonald's is it's the home of the Whopper. Tessa says they have meat alternatives. They have come up with the impossible Whopper, right? So that's clearly correct. But their big thing, and the thing that I think initially distinguished them in the market, was McDonald's. The McDonald's brothers came up with these really fast hamburgers. First of all, they're small, so they're a tenth of a pound. You can fry those really, really quickly. That's what made McDonald's initially be able to do that. But they're fried. So Burger King's brand identity in the marketplace, and the Whopper, was that it was flame broiled. It wasn't fried on, a grill. And it does taste different, right? I mean, the way you cook hamburger meat does sort of make a difference in the way it tastes. So that was their sort of brand distinguishing identity, was that they had flame broiled hamburgers rather than fried on a griddle type hamburgers. Wendy's, another fast food chain. When I was a kid growing up, their whole thing was, where's the beef? They had these little women that drove around in this car, and they actually revived this commercial not very long ago, like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, with where's the beef? And the idea was that McDonald's, you couldn't really see the beef because they have these little tiny hamburger patties, these tenth of an ounce or tenth of a pound hamburger patties. And Wendy's, and their hamburger patties are square instead of round. And so that was sort of what distinguishes them from other service providers in the area. Positive brands lead to gains in company performance. Coca-Cola, this positive image people have of sort of an iconic American brand. The first product we sent to communist China was not communist Pepsi. It was Coca-Cola, right? God-given Coca-Cola, not Pepsi, which is another tool of Satan. Leads to positive brand performance, gains in the company's bottom line. So branding can assist consumers in the decision-making process, and that's one of the reasons it's really, really important. It helps us, it provides what we call heuristics or shortcuts in the decision-making process. We know what McDonald's is, we know what Burger King is, we know what we're going to get. Whereas if you go to Joe's Really Good Burgers in Goaty Bow, Oklahoma, it may be fantastic, or it may be god-awful. And you don't know what you're going to get. You know with McDonald's what you're going to get. It provides this information shortcut that we know what we're going to get when we go there. So what is it that makes a good brand? How should you go about developing a brand? Well, Turley and Moore suggest that the following elements are critical in developing good brands. It should be short. So think about the iconic brands. Google. One word. It's easy to spell, right? It's easy to remember. Coke, Coca-Cola. It should be distinctive. I used to do this experiment in my principal's class before COVID. I would put somebody in a blindfold at the front of class. I would have them reach into a bag and pull out an item, and the item was a Coca-Cola bottle. That's part of Coca-Cola's branding. That's called, in terms of protection, that's called trade dress, right? You get protection for your brands. It's one of 3 major types of intellectual property that you can have. So the types of intellectual property that we have in the United States generally are copyright. Copyright doesn't protect anything useful, with sort of one exception. Copyright is written stuff or performed stuff, things that you have to put it in some medium now, known or later discovered. You get copyright protection instantly. If you file with the Library of Congress, you can get statutory damages for people who infringe upon your copyright. And so there's all kinds of stuff that's copyrighted. So these videos that I'm producing, I'm making them, I'm the copyright holder. I get them instantly. If I file them with the Library of Congress, I can get copyright protection for them, and that's great. So that's one type of intellectual property. Another type of intellectual property, but it expires. So you get copyright for the life of the author plus I think 70 years. That's, I think. I may have to go back. That's the Disney amendments. It's called Disney Always Wins. So Mickey Mouse was about to go into the public domain. The copyright on Mickey was about to expire. And we're not talking about the Mickey that we all know. We're talking about the original Mickey, the Steamboat Willie Mickey. Disney got Congress to extend the copyright protection on everybody's copyright. But you get it at least for your lifetime plus a certain number of years afterwards. And so Mickey is still part of Disney. It's still copywritten material. But lots of things go into the public domain, right? I mean, if you don't have to have any permission to reproduce Plato's Republic. Copyrights, Plato's been dead for 500 years, more than that, and, more than 500 years, and so we don't have to worry about copyright. Any book producer can produce it, right, without violating copyright. So you get at least for the life of the author plus some number of years. Then there's something called patent. Patent is one thing that protects useful stuff. Like, for example, the way you use this device that I'm doing right here, Apple came up with the idea of pinching the screen to make it bigger or smaller. That's a technology that's patentable. Right? The technology behind that allows you to do that is patentable. That expires after a certain number of years. It's not the entire life. It's 15 years. And it starts at the time you begin prosecuting the patent. So drugs are patented. The third major type of intellectual property that we protect is trademark, which protects brands. And so you can get all kinds of trademark protection for even the trade dress. And so I used to have people reach in and grab out, they'd be blindfolded this bottle, and I'd say, what is that? And because that's part of Coca-Cola's brand, that distinctive bottle that they have, everybody knows what it is. I mean, if you've ever felt it one time, it's different. The Coca-Cola bottle is different from Dr. Pepper's bottle, different from Pepsi's bottle, right? That's part of it. So it should be short, Coke. Coca-Cola is pretty short, it's 2 words. Easy to spell, easy to remember, distinctive. That bottle is distinctive. What else is distinctive about Coca-Cola? The script that they write Coca-Cola in. The white wave on a red field is distinctive to Coca-Cola's brand. So it should be distinctive, and it should not carry any negative associations. Now, this is one that is really, really difficult, because something that has not got negative associations today, when we create it, can develop negative associations over time. So how does this happen? When I was, and I'm kind of amazed, you still find this, when I was a kid growing up, there were all kinds of sports teams, both at the local level, high school teams, college teams, all the way to the national level, that used things like names and images like the Redskins, right? Or the Chiefs. Where I went to law school, Oklahoma City's mascot they were called the Oklahoma City Chiefs, and their mascot was this, sort of Native American person in full stereotypical headdress. All of that has become sort of negatively associated. Now, why is it that, and you can lose trademark protection over these things, right? Or you could. There's cases that are litigating that as to whether or not what's considered sort of an immoral trademark can get trademark protection. But lots of people have just given them up. Why is it that Florida State can still use a Native American in sort of full warrior dress as their trademark? Yeah, there are 2 Seminole tribes in the United States. There's the Seminole tribe of Florida, and they own Hard Rock, or they did at one point in time, by the way, a very wealthy tribe. There's the Seminole tribe of Oklahoma. So the Seminoles were located primarily in the East Coast in Florida. When they did Indian removal, what they call Indian removal, the ones that they could get, they relocated to Oklahoma, right? Some of them wouldn't relocate. They retreated to the sort of swamps of Florida. That's the Seminole tribe of Florida. There's a Seminole tribe in Oklahoma. The Seminoles in Florida have contracted with Florida State to allow them to use that. But all these others, Oklahoma City went from being the Chiefs to being the Oklahoma City Stars. Right? They changed their trademark because there was this sort of negative association. In the 1950s or 60s, nobody would have thought about that. Nobody would have cared about that. We have become more culturally sensitive, and so something that in the 1950s didn't have a negative connotation, all of a sudden does. Aunt Jemima is no longer, I mean, they're phasing out that brand. Uncle Ben's, which sort of use antebellum imagery, are gone. Again, in the 1950s, and people even didn't really think about Aunt Jemima or Uncle Ben's. They had updated her. The original Aunt Jemima was sort of this mammy-looking figure. So like from Gone with the Wind, if you've ever seen Gone with the Wind, it was that sort of mammy-looking figure. They had updated her. They had made her look sort of like a middle-class, housewife with pearls. It's still, I mean, it has, there's a sensitivity, and largely as a result of the Trump presidency. I think, that like companies were like, oh my God, we gotta think about this. And so that they've taken that brand off the market in an attempt to be sort of culturally aware. Again, in the 1950s and 60s, nobody would have thought about that. Right? It didn't have any negative associations. We have become more culturally aware. So something that didn't start out having these negative associations can ultimately develop these negative associations. So what kinds of typologies of brands can you have? There are 5 basic types according to Trillian Moore, and I had a 6th type that you should know for the exam. That's usually an exam question. The 5 types are descriptive brands. Now, from a trademark standpoint, if you have a purely descriptive brand, unless it has a clear connection in the mind of the consumer, you may not get protection on the trademark register. So again, copyright expires sometime after the death of the author. Patent expires. Brands never expire unless they become generic, in which case they can be, you can get rid of them. People can attack them as being generic or being purely descriptive. It may not get brand protection. So descriptive brands, what's nice about a descriptive brand is that it tells you what the product is, but you may have a hard time getting protection and keeping your brand name from being diluted by other people in the marketplace if you have a purely descriptive brand. And some of these overlap, right? So Coca-Cola at one point in time started out as a descriptive brand. What was it? Why was it descriptive? Well, cola is by definition a caramelized, carbonated beverage, right? So it's made with some kind of caramel base. It's carbonated, and that's what makes it a cola, right? Sprite used to have this thing where they were the uncola because they don't have like sort of this caramel base. They're clear. It's carbonated, but it's not caramelized. So that's sort of like the definition of cola. It had cocaine in it initially, so it was a purely descriptive brand. Right? No longer has cocaine. It's got a well-defined image, a middle connection in the mind of the consumer, and so it's not a purely descriptive brand, and it's certainly not anymore. But you may want to think about that. So like Chesapeake, there's nothing inherently connecting the Chesapeake Bay region, which is what Aubrey, who started Chesapeake, built his whole idea on, was he liked the Chesapeake Bay and that sort of image, and he built these little cottages that look like sort of New England or East Coast, villages. Nothing descriptive about that, right? You can have person-based brands. You find these a lot in law firms. accounting firms, service firms that are named after their founders. Associated brands. You find these a lot in other countries. In the United States, where we don't have such a big deal on this, we call sparkling wine from California champagne. Technically, it's not. In order to be champagne, champagne is an associated brand. It has to come from the Champagne region of France. And in Europe, they are very protective of these kinds of things. If a wine comes from Italy and it's a sparkling wine, it's not champagne. That's an associative brand. You can have geographic reference brands. What's a geographic reference? First National Bank. That's geographic reference. And usually it goes with, of X, of Seminole, of Guthrie. Alphanumeric brands, that's where you can combine that, like First National Bank of Guthrie is an alphanumeric combined with the geographic reference brands. The category that I add to this is theme-based branding. And it's enormously important anymore, theme-based branding. So Frontier City here in Oklahoma City is a theme-based brand, and it's a service brand, right? It's sort of like the Wild West. That's their theme. This frontier town, because we consider ourselves part of the sort of frontier. And so that's a theme-based brand. And I think that's becoming enormously important. We like themes. It helps create that mental image in the mind of the consumer. So once you've developed these, you have to manage the brand. So how do you manage the brand? Well, there are 10 attributes according to Keller. The brand delivers benefits customers truly desire. What has kept McDonald's popular all this time? You know what you're going to get when you're traveling across country. And I am the executive chef for my family's business. I do all of the catering and things like that. I like food. I like to cook food. I'm really good at it. But I will tell you that I still go to McDonald's when we're traveling across country. A lot of times we're adventuresome and we'll try local places. But if you got somewhere you got to go. When my brother lived in New York, we used to drive to New York a lot because we made the mistake of flying to New York one time, and you're trapped, and we didn't have a car. So I'm a college professor. We would drive to New York so that we would always have a car, so that we wouldn't get trapped and be at the mercy of my brother and his then evil wife. And we're like, oh no, you can't take a car. I need it, and you're stuck there. He had Irish twins. Okay, that means that they were both born within the same year period. And so my niece and my nephew, who are currently staying with me because it's their spring break, and their father was like, you got to get these kids. Like they were little kids, particularly when you're that close in age and they're in diapers, it's horrible. And like you want to escape. So we would drive. And if we had to get there in any reasonable amount of time from here to New York is a 2-day drive. Unless, you just are really going like the wind and you just go straight through. It's about a 22, 23-hour drive. That's really hard to do. So we would always stop. So if you're really going, McDonald's is great. The restrooms are going to be clean. You're going to get in and out of there fairly quickly, and you know what you're going to get, right? So that's the benefits that customers truly desire. The brand stays relevant. McDonald's is trying to do this. They're an example of a brand that's trying to. One of their most profitable segments is the breakfast market, and they had this huge market share in that. They started losing that market share to a tool of the devil called Starbucks, right? So they're trying to stay relevant. If you look at McDonald's, again, they've gotten rid of Ronald McDonald. They've gotten rid of the hamburger. They're no longer got all these stupid kids parks. If you look at the new McDonald's, they look a lot like a Starbucks. I'm not sure how this repositioning is going to work, but they're trying to stay relevant. And they've come up with these, coffee drinks that are supposed to compete. By the way, in blind taste tests, McDonald's just plain coffee always beats Starbucks. Because Starbucks, this is not me just telling you it's a tool of the devil. It is a tool of the devil, but they always lose Starbucks all, they did that deliberately. It's one of the reasons they're a tool of the devil. They deliberately sold burnt coffee because they know if you're going to do a latte or a cappuccino, if you add a lot of milk to something, it doesn't really matter that you use crappy beans. Doesn't matter, right? And they did this deliberately. There's internal memos that show that's one of the reasons they're a tool of the devil. So the brand stays relevant. McDonald's is trying to do that. They've now come up with, I like just plain black coffee, but most people don't. Most people want, so McDonald's is doing the iced coffees, and they're doing putting the whipped cream in it and things like that. They're trying to stay relevant. The pricing strategy is based on customers' perceptions of value, right? Now this can be low or high. Rolex doesn't want to sell a watch to everybody. Rolex goes up in price 10% every year. You're never going to get a Rolex cheaper next year than you are this year because they go up every single year because their perception and their marketing strategy is that they want it to be an exclusive item. And people who want high-end Swiss watches value that. Right? So it is based on the perception of value. They position the company properly with regard to this idea of value. And then finally, they are consistent in their brand message. In the political marketplace, one of the best marketers I ever saw was George W. Bush. He was always consistent on message. When he ran against Ann Richards for governor of Texas, she was the most popular governor in the country, not just among her own people, but in the country. She was a superstar, and he beat her because he was so consistent in his message during that campaign. There was an anomaly in the crime statistics. At the time, crime was overwhelmingly decreasing. Year over year, it was going down. There's some reasons why that is true, but it was going down. They had only started to recently disaggregate the crime statistics on juvenile crime. So it looked like crime was increasing because of these juvenile crime statistics. What I mean by disaggregate is they had never reported juvenile crime separate from the other categories. They simply reported crime statistics based on the types of crime. It was either property crime, crimes against person, white collar crimes, things like that. They began to disaggregate that statistic, and it looked like it was shooting through the roof. George W. Bush had people in Texas believing that there were hordes of feral children ready to rape, pillage, and plunder at the drop of a hat, based on that one statistic. You could ask him what time of day it was, and out would come his stock answer. We must cure juvenile crime in Texas. Juvenile crime is becoming more violent, more random, and more dangerous. It was all the time. Donald Trump picked up on this, and he did it in his branding, and he was pretty successful in it as well. He had 48% of the people believing that legitimate news sources like NBC, ABC, and CBS are fake news, right? And he even admitted it in one of his interviews with Leslie Stahl before he was president. She said, these are not, you're lying. It's easy to catch you in these lies. And he's like, doesn't matter. People, if I say it enough, people will believe it. And they did. They did. I mean, it was overwhelmingly consistent. Fake news, fake news, fake news. Even though the facts are overwhelming. But it's that consistency in the message, right? That is important. So the brand portfolio and hierarchy have to make sense as well. If you look at Marriott, Marriott has all kinds of different hotel brands under their Marriott umbrella. They've got Residence Inn. They've got, I'm trying to think of some of the other Marriott brands. Courtyard by Marriott, Fairfield by Marriott, right? These are different price points, but what makes that brand portfolio and hierarchy make sense? They're all in the lodging, hospitality, and transportation, tourism sector. So it makes sense. Their portfolio makes sense. The brand uses the full repertoire of marketing activities to build brand equity. So depending on what your product is, your service is, the way you use the full repertoire of integrated marketing communication, which we'll talk about towards the end of the semester, makes sense in promoting that brand. The brand managers understand what the brand means to consumers. It's one of the reasons I don't think Sonic is as popular as McDonald's. For years and years and years, Sonic had this CEO named Cliff Hudson. I think I told you this, like one of my friends, we had this company that tested products. We do and Cliff, margarita vanilla lime slush or cherry lime slush. No, you're not in that demographic. Who goes to Sonic again? And he just thought the two guys were the whole reason that Sonic. Those two guys are horrible. And again, not your demographic. Like anyone your age, who goes to Sonic? Soccer moms and teenagers. Are those two guys in that demographic? Two middle-aged, creepy guys, not in the demographic, right? McDonald's knows. I mean, they know what the brand means to consumers. They're trying to change it somewhat, but they know what the brand. It's one of the reasons that they are still have the largest market share of most of these, of most of these segments. The brand is given proper support. They came out with a car company, GM came out with a car company called Saturn, and it was supposed to be a different kind of car. It was supposed to be a different kind of car buying experience. It was to compete with sort of these lower end cars that were coming in from the Korean market. Never got the proper support that it needed to survive. The company continues to monitor sources of brand equity. How do you do that? Well, in my own company, one of the things we constantly look at TripAdvisor to see where we are and see what people are saying. We constantly solicit feedback from our guests. You do market research to keep up with the sources of brand equity. So companies that do this really, really well, that are good at branding, engage in what's called living the brand. Organizations act through their agents. Agents impact customers and constituents' perceptions of the organization. An agent that lives the brand consistently projects the organization's vision, value, and culture. What's a company that does this? Southwest Airlines does it. Southwest is the only airline, I think, that has not gone through bankruptcy. Why? They've done several things that have made them enormously successful. First of all, they only fly one model of airplane, the 737. Now, there's been some problems with the 737. I have a commercial pilot's license, so I know a lot about airplanes, right? So there have been some problems, but it makes it easy to fix. If you've got a problem with the plane, and if you're American and you're flying, at one point in time they no longer fly the 747, but you're flying 747s and 737s and 727s and Airbus and all these things. What happens when one of those breaks down? You got a whole flight full of people on an Airbus, and you can't just put them on a 727. Or you got a regional jet that all of a sudden is, that American Airlines flies, and it's got a problem. Well, you can't just pull an Airbus, to go fly. American Airlines flies into Stillwater, or they used to, on the regional jet. The ramp weight will not support an Airbus. Southwest Airlines flies the same airplane. I mean, it's real easy if you got a problem with a plane to put another plane in there. It also means that you have parts and the ability to fix those planes. But they also have, Southwest didn't always pay the most for their pilots and their flight attendants and their gate agents and people, but they love Southwest. I have two friends who work for Southwest, two brothers. Spent all of their life working. They love Southwest. They are fiercely loyal. They're both A&P mechanics. Fiercely loyal to that brand. They know what that brand means, and they are fiercely loyal to it. That's living the brand. Southwest does an exceptional job of living the brand. They do a really remarkable job of internal marketing and branding to get that vision, that culture. Southwest makes it a game when they do this stupid, like, although now, literally, because seatbelts are no longer, when I was a kid growing up, seatbelts like that they put on planes were similar to the seatbelts that you have in cars. They literally have those things where you have to lift up and buckle and things like that. Like if you don't know how to put on a seatbelt at this point, like you're probably a prime candidate for natural deselection. And, but Southwest makes it a game. They have to do this stupid flight briefing. I'm a commercial pilot. I can tell you, like, even on little planes, we're supposed to do this, like, this is the door. There's a fire, get out. They make it funny. I mean, they're funny about it. It's great. They live the brand. Any questions about branding? All right, we'll talk about services next time. And then next week, just so that I'll say this several times, we will not meet as a class. I'm giving you that week to work on your article reviews. So you do not have to get up. Isn't that nice? You don't have to get up at 7:30 or whatever it is and roll out of bed and come over or flip on the computer for those of you that are in the extended class section. So, all right. I will see you all on Thursday. I hope you have a good afternoon. If you got markers today, come see me. For those of you that texted me, I will update those points as well right now. The class participation.